Hey guys, so at the moment we have two fantastic guests that we have lumped into one Uncut. So the first one is Eva Pears. She's an Australian woman who works in the education system in this country. And then we have Kerry McDonald, an amazing American who knows the academic system in the US and about education reform. So I hope you guys enjoy these two Uncuts that we had on our show some time ago.
Alright guys, Resolute TV, we're on episode 7. We've got the lovely Eva here. This is our first time meeting even digitally, you and I. But we seem to have a lot of mutual friends and things like that. And my mother's up on the Central Coast, so, you know, I go up a fair bit. I just don't bother to visit anybody else. So you're joining us today because you're a former history and geography teacher.
That's right. Former
is the important word here, and you've quickly discussed.
Yes.
That's fantastic. That excites me. I love that sort of stuff. There's a story behind it. And you also have a useless anthropology degree.
Absolutely.
Interesting. Absolutely. You know, like, that's, I mean, I don't have any degrees, so that's pretty interesting. A Novocastrian beach bum. You like dank memes and laughing at third wave feminists. What about the fourth wave? Are they special or what? You're not excluding them, I hope. But the exciting part is you're also running as a candidate for LDP, which the Liberal Democrats, most people who are taking notice of this channel at this stage are somewhat libertarian and have an idea who the LDP is. But you're going to have a crack at Newcastle City Council in 2021. So, mate, I'm excited. Thanks for coming on. It's pretty cool. And that's a cool little bio. Tell us, where do you want to start? What do you want to tell us about? Why did you quit the school system?
Oh man. Well, both my parents were teachers. When I finished my useless anthropology degree and went, what do I do here? I can't get work. And I thought, oh, well, I'll just go and do a Master of Teaching at Melbourne Uni, which was at the time a fast track master's. So they squished 2 years into a year and a half. And both my parents were like, don't do it. Don't do it. And I went, well, I'm going to do it. And I did it. And during university, in my undergrad, I became very, very aware in the social sciences faculty of a sort of hardcore leftist Marxist indoctrination, particularly in the subjects that I was doing, like anthropology and sociology, and I did gender studies and all that stuff. And
I came out. Is the useless anthropology degree as useless as what I imagine a gender studies degree is?
Yeah, pretty much. And it's a real shame that a lot of those subjects have been hijacked by so many kind of like radical leftists, because subjects like anthropology are really valuable, I think, and the humanities are valuable to culture and society and civilization. But the way that it's sort of framed and theorized at universities it's a real shame. But yeah, and I came across the same experience at Melbourne Uni, doing the MTeach as well. There are a couple of subjects where there was one other girl in my classes, and we just kind of look at each other occasionally and just be like, are you hearing what I'm hearing? It was all like really social constructivist, like heaps of Russian theorists on social learning. So there was no more kind of that the teacher should be like the sort of the expert, and, you know, traditional chalk and talk was out. It was all about social learning and discovery learning and project-based learning and all this kind of other rubbish.
Well, I mean, there is an argument for throwing kids in the pool and seeing if they drown, isn't there? That's learning via experience. There you go, kids.
Yeah. I think that sort of approach is really good for kids that are already of a sort of a higher level of intelligence and they're really self-motivated and stuff. But what it does is it squashes everybody into a medium. So the top gets lost because they want to be pushed, and the bottom gets lost and they fall away, and it squishes everybody else into a medium. That was my interpretation of what was going on. Because that's nice. We have nice little like happy, compliant citizens then. anyway, so then when I left my teaching degree, I moved up to Newcastle and I started casually teaching just to get a foot in the door, which is the pathway for most teachers. You start off as a casual. And I went to pretty much every single local public high school in the area as a casual, and I was just gobsmacked. I was absolutely gobsmacked. Not only at the blatant political indoctrination of the teachers and the way that they were presenting certain information to students, particularly in the history and English classes. But I was also really disgusted just at how filthy these schools were. They were just so disgusting.
You mean from a hygiene standpoint?
Okay. Yeah. And I started a little project where I would take photographs on the sly of the staff rooms, because every single one I walked into was just foul. And then I started asking the kids, what are your bathrooms like? And every single one of them without fail would say, we don't have any soap. We don't have any soap. So I would make it my thing to go and speak to admin and go, hey, there's no soap in the boys' toilets. There's no soap in the girls' toilets. And they used to look at me like I was from outer space. And it only took a global pandemic for them to understand basic germ theory. So it was kind of a combination of that. And I also found myself, once I did get a foot in the door and got some permanent roles within the humanities faculties at a local selective public high school, I was quickly kind of ostracised by the rest of the staff, because it became clear that I wasn't happy with parroting some of the narrative in the curriculum as easily as they were. So I was kind of on the out, and once that contract was up, they just went, see ya, you're not one of us. Yeah, right. And I wouldn't join the teachers union.
So you're a natural born rebel. Thinking for yourself, that's disgusting and outrageous. How dare you think and form your own opinions? You're in the education
I'm a domestic terrorist.
Yeah. If that's the case, I'm probably guilty as charged as well, mate. As you know, funnily enough, my mother works in the education system, and again, I like you, I won't name schools or anything along those lines, and she's not political in any way, shape, or form. But you know, some of the stories I hear about issues that she sort of finds and things like that. Of course, I go on a complete libertarian tangent about how it should all be privatised or done from home, and this is a complete debacle and whatever. But taxpayer funded, you know, waste of money. But it's and every industry has its pros and its cons, I'm sure. But this one seems to be fairly well tailored to manipulation from my opinion.
Absolutely. And when I was in it as a casual, I started to read some writing of a guy, John Taylor Gatto, who's he won Teacher of the Year in New York City in the 90s, and he quit on stage when he was accepting this award, and he became a really big homeschooling and unschooling advocate. So I started reading his writing and a couple of other academics who were really highly critical of the compulsory public schooling model, more from like a Yankster sort of standpoint, but it really fits into the Australian paradigm as well, like, you know, how it was all sort of set up post-industrialisation, and it's basically made to make factory workers good compliant citizens that will work in the factory and not question, and it's about compliance and obedience. It's not really about education.
Yeah.
And I think during this pandemic, because I work as a private tutor now, and I'm doing so many literacy and numeracy assessments at the moment. I'm so busier than I've ever been, because parents have got their kids at home and they're going, holy crap, my kid can't add. And they're in 6, or my kid doesn't know what a meter is and they're 14. Yeah.
It's crazy, some of the stuff. And some of the stories here. I've been watching a guy on Twitter and online called Corey DeAngelis, and he's a big advocate. I don't know if you've spotted him, but it might be worth you checking him out. I might even send you a link later. I'd love to get him on for this program. He's a very interesting guy, but he's actually he's an American guy, and he's fighting for the ability of people to be outside the government-run systems and a choice. You know, if you want your kids to go to a government-run school, great. If you don't, you want to homeschool, it shouldn't be a problem. If you want to send them to a private tutor or a private whatever, it shouldn't be a problem, which makes an awful lot of sense to me. There was a lot of things. Milton Friedman, the great libertarian, economists used to talk about, with vouchers, whereby the schools should be competing for different types of kids, as opposed to, I'm not an academic per se, but you know what I mean. The kids who are mechanically minded, you could have schools,
a tech school,
tailored for their needs and areas where they're going to be really good. But they don't start any of that stuff until it's sort of too late, I think, and there's a lot of merit to it.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Whether they'll ever do it, I don't know.
It kind of used to be like that, back in the day. You used to have like the tech college, and then the girls' school.
Nobody went to tech colleges or tailored colleges until they were sort of at that far older spectrum, where by then they're already buggered.
Yeah, they're already indoctrinated into the system. And I looked into the process of homeschooling in New South Wales, and it's quite intense. It's quite a rigorous, and you have to basically apply for government approval to do it, and you have to submit really intense curriculum. And the only groups that I could find that really got on top of that were religiously based homeschooling. There's not a lot of secular homeschooling groups going on. So I don't know. I think there's definitely a market for it in the future.
Oh, look, and there's an argument that, and I've spoken to quite a lot of people on the education topic recently, with all the homeschooling and stuff like that, and they're going, I just couldn't homeschool all the time. Well, that's fine. You shouldn't have to homeschool. Yeah. You pay enough tax, so you shouldn't have to, but you should also have the choice to not. Now, I don't know if you're up on the stats and whatever, you probably know more than me. Is it true our kids are about 4 or 5 years behind Singapore, for an example?
Yeah, well, if you look at the PISA, the PISA metric, which is a literacy and numeracy global metric that's done, I think, yearly. Like Australia in the last, I think, 20 years, our spending on education has gone up like to $18 billion or something, and we're fallen like every single year steadily. So I think last year our numeracy was beneath Kazakhstan. I could be wrong.
I'm pretty sure I read or heard that on the TV or something, and I just started laughing because I was like, I don't claim to be any great intellectual, but let me tell you, if we're spending this much on education and it's going in that direction, not to insult anybody from Kazakhstan, but we're supposed to be a first world leading country, and our kids can't read, write, count, spell. It's a pretty disgusting indictment on the system.
Yeah, absolutely. And my tinfoil hat kind of vibes and tells me that it's deliberate. That it's a deliberate dumbing down.
We must get our tinfoil hat from the same shop, because I'm convinced that there's they don't want kids thinking for themselves. They don't want that independent thought. They don't want that. They want, are you going to vote for Liberal or Labor, and are you going to keep us in our cushy jobs, and are you going to do as you're told when we tell you? Yeah. And I think a lot of this COVID stuff is just a good exercise on governments around the world, and it's mostly the Western governments that seem to be doing it. Don't hear too much of it happening, in Kazakhstan. But it's a good exercise in them exerting how much compliance will we get out of people. I made a post about an hour ago that Australia's just hit 100 deaths from COVID. We've had over 1,000.
I thought it was going to be 150,000 by the end of the month.
We've had over 1,000 car accident related deaths in the same period of time, and we didn't close the economy down and destroy businesses and lives based on that. So there's far more at play than what they're letting on, because there's no way 100 deaths and tragic. I'm not saying you could, but you do the math on it, and the math is pretty cold. It's definitely overcooked.
So maybe they learned how to do maths in an Australian public school.
They didn't have you teaching them then, I'm sure, huh? That's crazy stuff. It's crazy stuff. So, mate, how would you fix it if you were in charge? If you're, don't worry about the Newcastle election. If I run you as an LDP Prime Minister and we get you in, because as a feminist we can run you as a woman, we can do all that.
Yeah. I'm in the oppression Olympics. I'm a white feminist though. So
right.
And I'm straight.
Surely you can invent some ethnicity somewhere of some sort.
Do say I'm part Cherokee or something. I think the problem is with teacher standards. That to get into a teaching degree at most universities, you don't really need to have a very high ATAR. I mean, I'll give you an example. I did an assessment because I assess adults as well for literacy and numeracy, and that's another problem is adult literacy and numeracy in Australia is something that is not talked about. But I did an assessment on a teaching, she's doing her Bachelor of Teaching, and she wanted help. There's now a land-type test that all teachers have to pass in literacy and numeracy to get their degree. It's based on the Year 9 NAPLAN. So it's Year 9 level maths and English.
Australia Year 9, so Singaporean Year 4.
Yeah, essentially. And this is a person who's in tertiary education, studying to be a teacher, who was absolutely freaking out that she wouldn't pass this land type test. So she's come to me to be assessed for her literacy and numeracy. She's a teaching candidate to teach primary school, so generalist, and this is the basics that we're talking about. She admitted to me, she said, I don't know my times tables. I don't know math. And she's studying to be a primary school teacher. So I did the assessment on her. I did a Year 8 level assessment, and she completely flunked. And it's just terrifying. I go, how the hell are you even at university, let alone
well, how did you get here? But we're about to send you out to teach the next generation how not to read, write, and count. I mean,
and then the cycle continues.
It is farcical, and and I don't want to be the guy taking the piss out of teachers. I mean, on and off, there's a fair justification for taking the piss out of just about anybody. Every demographic, there's always room to take the piss out of them. But I mean, these are the guys who are charged with teaching the kids how to read, write, and count. That's the basic fundamental reason school exists.
Yeah.
Anything beyond that's extracurricular learning. You know what I mean? Like the couple of handful of things that you need to know to get through life: read, write, count. Now, there's other things that I would argue that should be in the system from about Year 5 and 6. They should be talking about taxation, lifey type stuff. How does the financial system work? We know they'll never do that because that would wake far too many people up. But I would argue that since taxes are something that everybody gets slugged with for their entire lives, it should be being discussed from early childhood so people understand. When I first left school, I had no idea what tax was. Yeah. I calculated my hourly rate when I first got a job. I calculated how much money I was going to get. And then I looked at my pay slip and there was nowhere near that amount there, and I was baffled. I was confused. I thought I'd been robbed, and I've been offended about it ever since. As I should be. I make no apologies for being offended by being robbed, but I shouldn't have been that vague on it. I had no idea. And it never and they're things that you do not get a choice in, and they're a big part of life.
Absolutely.
Whether you like it or not. So it would be good to see them fix some of these things up a little bit.
One thing that I've come across as well, it's not taxation related, but it is to do with numeracy as well, is that I'm noticing, so I tutor maybe 4 lessons per day with 4 kids in them. And I would say between 80 and 90% of them, when I first start tutoring them, and these are kids from kindy to Year 10, wouldn't be able to tell me how many centimetres there are in a metre. They wouldn't be able to tell you how many grams are in a kilogram. They wouldn't be able to draw the time on an analog clock.
I know a lot of adults who can't read an analog clock. And it sort of scares me a little bit. Like if I buy you a watch, are you trying to tell me that I've got to get you a digital one because you can't read a clock? Or if there's an analog clock on the wall and they go, what time is it?
Yeah.
You're in your 30s. The hell is wrong with you people?
Yeah. And these are kids who they're not remedial. They're not silly. They just haven't been taught. And I just kind of go, what the hell are you doing for 5 days a week from 9 to 3:30 every day? Colouring in?
It's funny, if I ask my nieces and nephews, what did you do at school today? Did you learn anything? The answer is no. I always just thought it was because they didn't want to explain themselves. I'm starting to figure out that they're actually not learning very much at all.
Yeah, it's pretty weird. It's pretty spooky. I think it's spooky.
Spooky is a good word. it's disappointing too. You know, like I mean, here's another little thing that I'm gonna tap you on, and we haven't really discussed it, but you did mention the feministy thing. Now in Victoria last year, I think it was, it sort of went around this new transgendered business whereby if a child goes to the parents and says, I feel like I'm a boy, I feel like I'm a girl, I'm a monkey's uncle, I'm an attack helicopter, whatever. If the parents aren't supportive of some sort of transitional whatever, the principals and the schools now have the authority to overrule the parents. I don't know how into law that is, but I know they've been experimenting with it. And when I mentioned to my mother, she said they would never go that far. But I recently saw an article saying they're bringing the same sort of thing where principals can overrule parents into New South Wales. Do you know much about that sort of stuff, or are we barking up the wrong tree?
I'm not sure how much power the principals do have. However, I was at a staff development meeting at the end of last year where this came up. A member of staff actually asked the principal at the school I was teaching at, if a student comes to school and says, I'm not Scott anymore, I'm Sophie, but the parents aren't supportive of it, what do we do? And the principal said, go with the student. The student has the power, not the parent. That's what she told the entire cohort. So that was the advice that we were given.
Yeah. And again, you know, like you look at some of these kids and you go, there's an argument for some of these kids are genuine.
Sure.
But the majority of them are just kids who are bloody confused, or, you know, I was Astro Boy for a year. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just crazy when you're primary school sort of stuff for this to be going on. It's just a disgusting overreach. But
so when I was studying my teaching degree, we actually had Ros Ward come in to give a speech, who was the founder of the Safe Schools program. She came in and spoke to our entire MTeach cohort at Melbourne Uni. And I remember, again, just looking at this one other person in the entire cohort of like 1,000, we just looked at each other and went, are you hearing this? Are you picking up? Are you picking this up? What's going on here? Yeah, it was pretty weird.
And what did you take from her speech? Like, I mean, I've sort of read stuff on it, but obviously whoever's watching this isn't going to know what I've read.
Oh, militant. Hardcore militant. That's next level Marxism into academia right there, and presenting information to the next generation of teachers. And the teaching college that I went to is number 2 after Oxford. Like, it's the second in the world ranked. It's really hoity-toity.
Well regarded, yeah.
And this is being taught as truth, as fundamental principle of to the next generation of teachers. Yeah.
It's pretty scary stuff, isn't it? You know?
Yeah.
I mean, my mother's fateful words when she heard the Victorian one here a year or so ago, I remember reading it and I went off my head and said, they would never go that far. And mum sort of teaches more special needs type students. She's not a teacher, you know, but I just said to her, I said, is this happening in your school? Because if it is, I'm coming to yell at somebody, you know, as I do. And she kind of went, no, they would never do that. That's not how the world works. You're getting aggressive for no reason again. But it's scary. It's very, very.
They rebranded it in New South Wales. It was called respectful relationships.
Oh, I never heard the term used. Yeah, right. So they're rebranding it. Of course they have.
As an anti-bullying thing. But when you actually dig deeper and look at the language, it's about reshaping identity into this kind of biological denialist, postmodern, weird. It's weird.
Do you have any theories on why they're doing that, or is that sort of?
Oh, you want to put my tin? I'll put my tinfoil hat on.
If you want to, you don't have to. This whole thing that I've created here is a full free speech. So if you go, I don't want to talk about that, we ain't going to talk about it. If you go, I'll go mad. No worries at all. Yeah, do it.
I reckon it has to do with a grander program to destroy the family, to destroy the traditional units of family by deconstructing gender. You have a really, and particularly in children, you have a whole new generation that is destroying traditionalism in the family, I reckon.
Yeah. Yeah, nothing. I tend to agree with you. I've heard a few other theories. There's, some are far more insidious than that, even, which is terrifying. You're going down rabbit holes when you see some of these things. But yeah, I've had people come to me with theories, nastier and far less pleasant, no doubt about it, than that. And the whole thing just seems pretty rank to me. But anyway, basically what we need to do is decimate the entire government, abolish the education system, and start again. Let's just start again.
Yeah. I have some thoughts sometimes where this whole joint just needs to be nuked. Like,
Mate,
I've walked into some schools and I'm just like, just get rid of it. And I've actually said to kids, usually the smarter ones, if I've got them in a senior class, drop out now, get out. You do not need to be here.
Yeah, and I know people who have done the whole read, write, count, get out, quick, just go. But they're not even learning to read, write, and count anymore. So that's a complete waste of time. A good mate of mine who's he's not quite LDP affiliated yet. He's no, it's all done. It's all a complete waste of time. The whole planet's buggered. They just need to start again, bomb it, start from scratch, see how it ends up. And there's some days I sit there and go, oh, mate, you're probably right. Ken, is it salvageable, and which portions do we want to salvage? It's a real worry, I suppose. But it is sort of what it is. So, mate, you've attacked third wave feminists in your bio here, and I wouldn't say sorry you haven't attacked them. You're laughing at them, and I joked about it at the start. And it's a brave question because a lot of women won't come out and say anything about feminists. I've been known, or I've sort of been known to be a sexist feminist. I coined the term, and I've said to people I'm a bit of a sexist feminist. Love women kicking ass. Some of my best friends are women, but if you're going to be a strong, independent woman, be a strong, independent woman. Don't be a strong, independent woman and then go, please save me. What do you take? What's your take on it? Because it's a hot topic. It's a nasty, it's a good topic.
It is a good topic. So I'm the daughter of like a 70s feminist. She rode a motorbike, and she was the sort of Gloria Steinem-esque kind of, and that's what I grew up around, and a lot of her friends, and they were always kind of like all men are bastards, you don't need no man kind of thing. And so I sort of grew up around that. Went to university, went into the whole gender studies sociology thing, and came out, I guess, I wouldn't say an anti-feminist, but I really started going, oh, this is weird. This isn't what I thought it was. You guys are full on. This is misandry.
Yeah.
And and then afterwards I started getting into like kind of Karen Strawn and men's rights activism, and kind of went down that rabbit hole a little bit, and I guess had a bit of an epiphany. And I'm sort of reluctant to call myself a feminist, even though I think I live the life of what a feminist 100 years ago would see as being the feminist ideal. I mean, I work, I make my own money, I do whatever I want, essentially, without harming other people as much as And
funnily enough, most women I know that do all those things are reluctant to call themselves feminists. It's amazing It's an amazing little thing I've just noticed over the years, is the ones who are screaming that I am a feminist. They're doing it, but then they go, well, who's going to give me my next paycheck? Where do I get money from? Who's going to do this?
Exactly. Yeah, and that type who made up the majority of my friendship circle until about 10 years ago, when they went, oh shit, I think Eva might be a conservative, or she might be different, or she might be thinking differently. Oh, we can't be friends with her anymore. They're all, lefty, socialisty kind of types who run to the government to help them at the drop of a hat, or big, and I call it big daddy government. You actually banging on about the patriarchy on one hand, but then looking for this patriarchal institution, the government, to help you at any moment. So you're either I don't know. It drives me insane.
In my head, it just feels like there's so much hypocrisy with that whole vibe, and and I've done some videos and supported some people who are probably living more of a feminist lifestyle than they realise, or they're sort of they'll call themselves anti-feminists. I actually was in, which is fine. I don't mind at all. I always worry about blokes who call themselves feminists. So I'm sort of like,
I've got that in my Twitter bio.
That's not going to get you laid.
We're not going to.
It's not going to get you laid, mate. I don't know if that's what they've told you at school, but that's not how it works. And on top of that, it's disingenuous. It's, you know what I mean? Like, I love women to bits. Some women, I think, horrible things.
Like anyone.
And I know some men who are complete useless, horrible bastards, and some I'll have a beer with and think you're a great bloke. So, I mean, for me, it's kind of funny. It's pretty laughable, but it's always good to get a sensible woman's opinion on the madness that is.
Yeah. I like one of the great contradictions that I find really funny is that they go, men and women are equal and they should be treated equally, but all men are bastards. And I go, well, then what does that say about women if they're equal?
Don't you argue with me about that logic. No logic. Logic's banned. That's terrible. It's funny though. It's funny if it wasn't so damaging to the family unit and the family law courts, which it's permeated fairly well.
Oh my God.
Of course, you just see all this stuff, on TV, the whole Me Too thing, and now they're going, well, men might hire women in, positions. Well, it's because we're shit. Yeah, I'm not going to hire a woman as my executive assistant just in case something goes wrong. And you see people like even that Keanu Reeves, the actor bloke, in photos, he actually goes to this point with his hands are out just so that he can prove that he hasn't touched these women. It's absolutely.
And he gets applauded for that. He gets put up on a pedestal for that, and I go, but that's bizarre. Like,
well, it's for him. He's covering his ass, and I don't think it's got anything to do with put me on a pedestal. It's called I just don't want to get assault, an assault charge. The poor bastards. I don't, it's a terrible, terrible thing. The whole gender construct thing is a disaster zone, and I don't know. Yeah. It's fairly disempowering.
Really a lot of it back to the Family Law Act. I think it was 1974 or 78. I think that legislation, as well-meaning as it might have been, no-fault divorce, I think there's a lot of issues there, and I think a lot of lives and the lives of men and the lives of children have been damaged by that because it allowed women who were feeling maybe, oh God, I'm going to maybe be caught up in the heat of their emotions at the end of a marriage, to use that legislation in a way to get back at their ex-partner rather than to come with the most equal and fair solution.
Yeah,
same with AVOs and things like that.
The best win for everybody would be the sensible thing, but it's not the world we live in, to be fair. And you look at an act like the one, the Family Court Act. It's a bit like the COVID lockdown act. We're going to lock down the country to stop COVID, but we're going to destroy businesses, destroy lives. The suicide rate's going up. People are going mad. The mental health issues, are going through the roof. So your one little law sort of half solved one problem, but it's created another 500,000 problems, and that's the same as the Family Law Act is. In theory, it solved that one little problem, but God, it's created a whole new world of disaster zone, and I don't see anybody winning from it. It's pretty ordinary.
Yeah, but I guess that's why I was attracted to libertarianism and maybe even like anarcho-capitalism, where I just think the least intervention, the least legislation possible, the least government possible is the best solution, because then you don't have that potential for a knock-on effect. You just intervene as least as possible.
And hopefully adults can sit down and go,
they're forced to.
Okay. Yeah, that's right, and then the arguments come about the power imbalances and stuff like that. That's just a natural phenomenon. Sometimes some women are stronger, some men are stronger. I know people who have been fairly weak men who've been dominated by their wives or ex-wives, and I know some fairly strong men who have, you know, been fairly well arseholes to their women. And what we've got to realise as a society is some people, male or female, just arseholes. You know,
we can't legislate against assholes.
Can't legislate against assholes. I mean, we can try all we like, but it's just a disaster zone. Yeah. So, mate, you're running for 2021 Newcastle City Council.
Mm-hmm.
What are you pushing? I reckon it's great. I'd love to see you win, and I'll do my bit from my end to try and get you, you know, stuck right in. What are you selling to the people of Newcastle? Why should they have you on council?
Well, Newcastle City Council is one of the first councils to sign on to the UN Agenda 2030 agreement, which a lot of local people are very upset about. So I'll be highly critical of that. This idea that Newcastle will become a smart city, and they're spending a shit ton of money on lots of smart initiatives, which I don't think are very smart. There is a lot of criticism over the current Lord Mayor and her little deputy. They are, I would say, Labor Party socialists. And a lot of people are very highly critical of them insofar as they are the types that go to the opening of an envelope but don't really seem to be actually doing very much. Lots of photo ops. There has been a lot of useless waste of money, say getting rid of the Newcastle City coat of arms to make it into a rainbow N, which a lot of people are also...
Rainbow N?
A rainbow N. Yeah, so they got rid of the old coat of arms, and it looks like an Oxford Street nightclub logo now.
That's fair enough.
There's been a lot of money wasted on moving council chambers, and just a lot of wastage and a lot of lack of transparency as well. So, you know, people feeling like they should know a little bit more about where certain funds are going, where all this big money pit is.
Yeah. And a lot of people forget that it is actually the citizens' money that they're spending.
Ratepayers' money. Yeah, there's a lot of, you know, like in many city councils as well, lots of over-regulation about building and permits, and, you know, the ability to like build a shed in your backyard is, you know, just ridiculous.
Yeah,
so stuff like that.
Generally legislated by some kid in the office who's never built a shed, wouldn't know anything about it, but they've read a manual somewhere, or possibly not read it if they've gone through an education system.
Yeah.
They've somehow fudged their way through university into a job, and here they are trying to tell often tradespeople or people with a reasonable amount of practical knowledge how to do or not do things. It's pretty laughable.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I suppose it would be, you know, your good old rates, roads and rubbish, you know, like if there's a pothole in Main Street, fix the fucking pothole before rebranding the coat of arms.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. I'd even go one step further, local council-wise. I'd like to be able to opt out of paying rates and say, I don't want any of your services.
Yeah.
I haven't requested your... Yeah, or I'll if I want to use your public tip, I'll come out and I'm happy to pay to deposit my rubbish with you there at a premium, but I don't want to pay you annually for a service I may or may not use. But that's a whole different rabbit hole that, you know, that would terrify most of the population. But that's how I'd like to see things done.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that because I don't know, maybe you've had the same sort of situation when you're speaking to people and you might bring up the word libertarian and they go, well, what's that? So my concern at the moment is to find messaging to be able to explain that concept to the electorate, because I've found when I'm at the pub or talking to people down at the beach, or, you know, local surfers and skaters and tradies and stuff, they are actually quite libertarian.
All libertarian. Yep, I've been banging that at the LDP now for 2 or 3 years. I actually had we're releasing a new program tonight on the channel called The Paradigm Shift. And I've actually got 3 others who were all involved in the protests, one in Melbourne, one in Sydney, and one in Perth the other day. So all 3 of them sort of were actively involved. 2 were arrested, and another one's had his book banned from Amazon.
Wow.
So if you've got nothing to do later on tonight, it's probably worth half a watch, you know. But I spoke to them about their libertarianism, and they're going, I don't even know what that is. What's a what? And I said, mate, just about everything you've spoken to me about since I've known you has been you're a libertarian, whether you know it or not. And he had no idea what a libertarian was out and out. But many people are, and I think this COVID stuff's actually going to crash the divide between left and right fairly well. And it's going to be people who have worked out that the government wants to own them, and the people who are going, no fucking thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's more about authoritarianism versus libertarianism rather than left versus right. Yeah.
That's it. I think that's where it's heading even short to medium term. You know, that's what I'll be pushing for. And that's your challenge, I suppose, to try and get elected. It's my challenge currently trying to get elected in the Eden Monero is pointing out to people I'm not actually trying to get elected to tell you what to do, trying to get elected so that if you want to build the shed in your backyard,
you can.
Build the shed in your backyard. It's your backyard. You bought the bastard. You've paid you've paid exorbitant mortgage rates on it so that you can own it. Go nuts.
Yeah.
No, look, thanks so much for coming on, Eva. It's been great having you on. It's nice to meet you face to face. We've seen each other online and stuff, and I've heard many, many things about you from all these crazy Newcastle libertarians and the like. It's all positive. It's all positive in my world. The government probably isn't real happy about it, but I'm not here to please them. All right, guys, we've got Kerry McDonald from the Cato Institute. You're also a writer for Forbes. Thank you for coming on.
Oh, it's great to be with you, Dean. Thanks.
All the way from Boston.
That's right.
That's fantastic. Now, I came across you because I do a little bit of study into education reform, and a fella in the US, Kurt Mercadante. I don't know how well you know Kurt, but he's been on here with me as well. We have a lot in common, and he sort of suggested reaching out to you. So you're a big advocate for education reform. What is it about education reform and about yourself? What else would you like to tell these people over here in Australia who don't know you yet? Yeah.
I'm an adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute, a senior education fellow at the Foundation for Economic Education, fee.org, which is the oldest free market think tank in the US, founded in 1946 by Leonard Read, who is the author of iPencil, the famous classic story about spontaneous order and how free markets thrive in individual freedom. So, and I'm, as you mentioned, a writer at Forbes. I'm also the author of the book Unschooled, Raising Curious, Well-Educated Children Outside the Conventional Classroom, that was published last year by Chicago Review Press, but has really had newfound interest as, of course, 1 billion students around the world have not been in school this spring due to COVID-19. So there's been some increased interest from families looking at not only, I suppose, how to manage this disruption to their living and learning schedules during the pandemic, but also I think a lot of people who really have been curious about alternatives to school, homeschooling, unschooling, self-directed education, and may have just lacked that catalyst to take the leap and see what it would be like to learn without schooling. And I think more and more families are saying, you know, even though this is nothing like typical homeschooling that we're all experiencing now, there are some positive points perhaps, and there is some benefit to moving away from that kind of standardized coercive model of education.
Yeah. It's been argued, I suppose, that really the current education system is still steeped in creating factory workers, not much else. And that's, I suppose, what we're desperate to try and change somewhat. I know the education system over here is not very impressive. I actually had another lady on over here who is an educator, and she's sort of trying to redefine the paradigm of education over here. She's embarrassed that she does a lot of private tutoring and has basically said that the homeschooling's brought out a whole bunch of parents who have discovered their kids are 11, 12, 13 years old and can't read and write properly. You know, why can't my kid add up? What's the story? What am I paying this goal? What's the government doing? Why is this happening? So I presume it's similar.
Well, it's right that in most of the developed world, the model that we have for for modern education is the Prussian model from the early 19th century, which was sort of this first model of learning that focused on compliance and obedience and standardization. And of course, this was also dovetailing at the time, like you said, with the Industrial Revolution. There was a lot of interest in these sort of, supposed efficiencies with factory models and with conveyor belts and all of these kinds of things. And that was really intriguing to a lot of education reformers. They thought, well, maybe we can do the same thing with schooling. And so, that was really the beginning of age-segregated classrooms, standardized state-controlled curriculum, standardized teacher training, that all teachers would be trained in the same way, and this real sense of command and control associated with learning that just really didn't exist before. Certainly in the US and around the world, it also led to the beginning of compulsory schooling. And so prior to the sort of mid-19th century, there was a real focus on, or there were different degrees of what was known as compulsory education, where there may be, indicators of a state interest in an educated citizenry, but there was a wide variety of education approaches, everything from public and private schools to church schools, charity schools, apprenticeship models, and of course, homeschooling was really the default prior to the 19th century. And that all begins to change, beginning with the Prussian model of education, which really starts to enforce this compulsion on parents to send their children to school under a threat of force, and then narrows this beautiful and broad definition of education into the four walls of a compulsory school classroom. And that's really where most education has remained now for almost 170 years in the US. The first compulsory schooling statute was passed in 1852, and other countries passed their compulsory schooling statutes throughout the 19th centuries, again, really mimicking this coercive Prussian model of learning.
Yeah. Which, I struggled at school. Obviously you did very well in that environment, but I did okay at trade school, did quite well in those sort of capacities. It's interesting to see the layers of what's happening now versus what was happening 100 years ago. Nothing seems to have changed. The kids aren't seemingly getting any smarter or any better, and the design in and around it isn't serving individual needs, which is where I'm an individualist. I'm pretty libertarian, and I just look at it and I think if I decided to go the family route, I'd be inclined to keep the kids at home, unless they sort of had some specific desire to be a doctor. Or obviously, if you need to be a doctor, you really need to go through that machine and learn everything. But if you just want to go out into life, I don't think the education system, certainly not here, teaches you much about life at all.
Well, one of the things that I do in my undergrad is that, some of us learn to play the game of school well, right? That it's a game of school. So I feel like I went through schooling and like you said, I liked it, right? Because I learned very early on how to win the teacher's affections, how to regurgitate to the satisfaction of the teacher in the test, how to be a good little girl who didn't speak out of turn. So I was well schooled, but I'm not sure I was well educated until I left school and, became an adult and realized, how learning really happens in the real world when we are hopefully able to reconnect with that kind of personal agency and self-direction, those innate drives for learning and discovery that are so often eroded through our system of compulsory schooling. So, I often think how tragic it is for children in school who refuse to play this game, and then have a lot of their passions, their curiosities, their interests diminished because those are not meaningful within this, again, kind of factory model of schooling. They're liabilities, they're not assets. And I just think what a waste of human capital that is for so many people to feel like they are not meant for great things because they refuse to play the game of school, or they, kind of refuse to do this memorization and regurgitation and so on. And hopefully, again, I think we're at a moment in the innovation era of the 21st century where technology has really democratized education and has enabled so many more people to have access to knowledge and information than ever before. It used to be you went to school because that was where the books were and that was where the knowledge was. And now, of course, that's all around us, often literally at our fingertips. And because of that, I think that this 19th century model of forced schooling that still prevails around the world is really outdated and inadequate for the realities of the 21st century. And I think the more that adults realize now that we're able to learn new things and explore our curiosities and discover new information and knowledge through technology, will begin to question the system that maybe we're putting our children through and say, really, was that a good thing for me? What might my life have been like if I had a more self-directed path to learning and discovery that wasn't focused so much on command and control that we see so often in conventional schooling?
It's a fair argument. I don't know if you've seen the thing that goes around now at the moment talking about how if coronavirus has proved anything, it's that education could be pretty well replaced by YouTube. And I think that's probably a slight exaggeration, but there is an element of that, of truth in that sort of statement. An awful lot of people could learn the stuff that they're forced to learn 8 hours a day in the schooling system, online. Here's a click of a button. As you said, that's where the books were. Not anymore. Not anymore at all.
I mean, I would still have tremendous value in in-person interaction. I think as so many of us have been disconnected from our communities over the past couple of months with the pandemic, we realize, maybe more so than we ever did before, how valuable it is to have that interpersonal interaction with folks. But I think that we also have a greater appreciation for the power of technology. And so I do think more of these hybrid models that leverage technology, but also don't lose sight of this, the kind of humanity of learning with people. I think we'll see more of that. And in fact, a recent survey in the US from Real Clear Opinion Research, just came out a couple of weeks ago, found that 40% of respondents said that they would choose homeschooling or virtual schooling when the lockdowns end. And this is reinforced in similar surveys that are suggesting the same thing, with families now getting a glimpse of different ways of learning that might, in fact, be better. Maybe their kids have really benefited from this different way of learning. Maybe, like you said, maybe they are, focused on learning specific content and they're able to do that much more quickly and effectively online, leaving a lot more time in the day to explore their own interests and passions. So I think we'll see more of this kind of hybrid and hopefully more, education options for families, which is certainly my main motivator, is really to expand education choice to more families.
Well, I mean, you are a mum of multiple children. It's obviously pretty important that you get them educated in a way that's not just suitable for society, but suitable for them and for you, I suppose.
Right. So I am a mom of 4 children who have never been to school, and they are able to learn in normal circumstances by being immersed in the people, places, and things of the community. As you said, we're in Boston, Massachusetts, where there are numerous classes and programming and mentors and apprenticeship experiences for young people. Often there are, museums and libraries that really cater to homeschoolers by providing extensive programming. And so, my graduate degree is in education policy at Harvard, and that's where I became interested in alternatives to school, alternative education, education choice. But then it was when I became a parent that my husband and I began looking for education options for our own children. And we really realized that if we sent our children to school, their learning would contract, that this immersion that our children have.
You go from looking at things like this to looking at things through this little narrow window that the schools want you to look through.
That, but also just the reality of it, that if we sent them to school, they would be with an age-segregated group of peers. They would be going to the same building every day, 5 days a week, with the same static handful of teachers and the same standardized curriculum. And instead, we wanted them to continue learning the way they had been in their early years, which was exploring the community, going to the library often, going to the museums, going to various cultural events, and really learning through those experiences and that exposure. And so we felt like that was important to us, to continue that kind of expansive learning rather than putting them into a much more narrow, singular version of education. And in this way, they're really able to flourish by following their interests and pursuing their passions and discovering, what their real gifts are.
Yeah. So does that mean now, and I'm no expert in the field, that's why I invite you lovely people on for. So does that mean as far as the kids go, now in Australia, there's pretty strict rules on how indoctrinated you need to be. Are you obligated to provide your government with certain amounts of testing to prove that the kids are up to certain levels on basics, or is that kind of in the US you guys go, no, you're an adult, you can sort of handle your own business, so to speak?
So homeschooling is legal in all 50 states and has been legally recognized in all states since the mid-1990s, but regulations vary by state. So in some states, you don't have any reporting requirements. In other states, you have kind of moderate reporting requirements. And then in other states, you have significant reporting and evaluation requirements, including perhaps standardized testing. So it really varies at the state level. And, for us in Massachusetts, it's focused more at the district level, at the city and town level, where we report annually to our local town. And again, even within that, there's quite a bit of variety among the different cities and towns across our state. So it really runs the gamut. There's no kind of one-size-fits-all homeschooling plan in the U.S.
Good. The one-size-fits-all model is sort of, I suppose, where I sort of start to get a bit. Well, that's where I struggled as a kid. I had a natural rebellious streak, a libertarian streak, even as a kid. Although I didn't know what that was, I wanted to know why that person at the front of the room was telling me what to do. Who are you? Where's you? What's it all about? Which isn't always a good thing, I can assure you. But the next little question, it would be, how come our education system, and you're far more learned than I, doesn't teach practical things about life? Why is it the kids leave school with no idea about taxation? Because I don't know anyone who's managed to avoid it yet. Or I know some that managed to minimise it, but I don't know anyone that outright avoids it. The banking system, because let's be fair, everybody as you get to certain ages has to deal with the banking system, and a lot of practical day-to-day skills. So not just those intellectually side of problems, but I don't know in the US, but a lot of I meet people now in their 30s and 40s who can't boil an egg,
right?
Can't pick an iron, can't fix a tap, can't do any really basic stuff. Is there, any reason you see that that's the case, or is it just not important enough for people to learn anything that's practical?
Right. I mean, the legacy of this course of modern schooling that is really challenged. So you're absolutely right. I mean, you look at something as in demand, for example, as computer programming, that's rarely taught in schools, and yet is so critical to the way our society works now. The World Economic Forum, for example, found that many of the most in-demand jobs and skill sets didn't exist 5 or 10 years ago. Other research shows that children entering elementary school or grammar school will work in jobs that have not yet been created. And so you're right, we have this system of schooling that really is not preparing young people for the jobs of the future or the realities of the innovation era. And I would argue is actually doing the opposite, potentially holding people back. I mean, if you think about what our realities are now, we're increasingly coexisting with robots. And if we think about the characteristics that differentiate humans from robots, it's things like ingenuity and creativity and an entrepreneurial spirit. And those are some of the qualities, like you said, that can often be eroded through a system of compulsory schooling. They're just not valued. You know, originality and creativity and curiosity are frequently stifled in a system of compulsory mass schooling. And yet those are exactly the qualities that we need to be cultivating, to be facilitating, to enable young people to flourish in this very dynamic, constantly changing, constantly evolving, technology-enabled economy where, again, human creativity is going to be the key differentiator from artificial intelligence.
Yeah, no, look, I sit here and I agree with you 100%. So if Kerry McDonald was in charge of education of children worldwide, including Australia, so if anybody in Australia is listening, listen. What sort of how would you tackle it? I'm all for choice for parents to do whatever, but we know that the school system's trying to remove even that. How would you design it? If you had carte blanche, you're in charge of the school system worldwide, what would you do?
Well, in that magical world, you know, I think the top thing would be really to eliminate compulsory schooling statutes. I think that would open up incredible experimentation and innovation in education to allow for different learning models that we haven't even imagined yet. But because we're so focused on schooling as being the way to educate young people, we ignore other potential ways of really cultivating ingenuity and curiosity and creativity. So that would be, you know, sort of my big lofty goal. I think a more practical step, however, would be to provide, you know, much more education choice to families. You know, I know in the United States, for example, taxpayers spend $700 billion a year in K-12 compulsory schooling. And so if we could redistribute that $700 billion to the learners themselves and allow families to have access to those dollars, but to use in a variety of different ways, the schools of their choice, different education models, and so on, through things like education savings accounts or tax credit scholarship programs and vouchers and so on, that would really put families back in charge of education and begin to really dismantle the education bureaucracy.
Yeah. So a lot like the Milton Friedman model of, if your kid's good at X, you know, we really, as parents, we should go, okay, my kid's got no aptitude for the geographies and the histories and whatever, but all he wants to do is build cars. Well, let's send him to a school that has a really good program for mechanics and whatever. That's sort of what you're angling at there?
Right. It's just so many more families, so that you're not required to attend the local district school, which is your kind of mandatory school assignment, but instead you have access to all kinds of different education options depending on your child's interests and your family's needs and so on.
So based on that, I'm now decreeing you in charge of education worldwide. How does that sound?
Hey, I don't think I think that's part of the problem, right? We don't have education leaders. It should be incredibly decentralized. We should really have this be in the hands of parents and allowing them to have access to all kinds of different choices. You know, I think parents are the ones best equipped to decide where their children are best educated and to have all kinds of different options available to them. And then parents will be able to pick and choose. And if they don't like the choice that they made, they can switch and move to a different environment for their children. I think that is the key. You know, we have so much choice in every other area of our life, right? We can, you know, we have a whole grocery store aisle of cereals to choose from or soda to choose from, right? And yet in education, we have so few choices and so little innovation, so limited variety in terms of education models. And it's just peculiar. So I think the more that we can break up this monopoly of mass schooling and put families back in charge, encourage education, entrepreneurship, and innovation, I think we'll see incredible results. Well,
you've just given me some hope for the future. Maybe we might not be as doomed as some of us sometimes think we are with all these things. So, Kerry, I always sort of just say to people at the end, where can everybody find you? Where can they buy your book? Where can they, study, listen, learn? What platforms do you want them to look at?
Right.
And let them find you.
Right. So probably the best place to reach me is at the Foundation for Economic Education. My website there is fee.org, FEE.org/Kerry, Kerry. And there you can link to my book, see all of my recent articles, as well as connect with me on social media and send me an email.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate you coming on. It's a delight to meet you, kind of thing. I've been following you and watching you, so now we actually get not that you want to look at this head, but it's a nice pleasure to meet you and see you and say hello. Hopefully we'll be able to get you over to Australia for like the Friedman Conference or something at some point. That'd be, I think you'd be a big hit over there. No worries. Thank you very much. You have a lovely evening, because it's evening over there, and I'll get on with the day. Thanks so much.
Thanks again, Dean. Appreciate it.